Hey, Dan,
Hey,
how's it going, dude?
pretty good. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Dude, same here, man. I apologize that out of all the folks that champs, you got stuck with me. You are truly up for a challenge, my dude. But I really appreciate in advance your patience, and I'm sure more folks watching will also appreciate your wisdom.
Oh, of course. Well, it's a big honor for me to teach you, so don't worry about that at all. This is what I do for a living, so it's a real pleasure. Now, with that being said, I
Right,
am of the Russian school of chess teaching, so I'm going to roast the hell out of you, but we'll
dude.
get to that
Yes,
later.
man. I want it. I want it. Be fierce. I'm down until I cry. If if I scream a little, scream a little loud, a little easier on me. Yeah, I'm ready, dude. So what? I mean, do you want? I mean, dude, I read your bio, and dude, you've been playing chess all your life, which is nuts to me since you were 6.
Yep. So my dad and my brother kind of jointly taught me. My brother's 4 years older than me, and I actually remember where I learned chess. It was at this birthday party, and I played Lego, Monopoly, and stuff with my brother. And my brother decided to bring along a chess set because
Right,
we would get bored,
right.
and that's when it started. I mean, it wasn't too glamorous at first. I get the crap beat out of me by my brother, but about a year or so in, it started replacing stuff like Lego. It was always just chess, chess, chess.
Wow.
And, I've always been kind of a balanced person. So I went to school my whole life. Now it's become very fashionable for like chess prodigies to be homeschooled and sort of go full steam ahead, especially in the US. But I was sort of always in school, always had other interests. So it's always allowed me just to not get burnt out and to keep my interest going.
Wow. Oh man, dude, it's in your
It
blood. Wow,
courses
that's
through my
awesome.
veins. How did you
Yeah.
learn chess, or what was your sort of experience?
Oh God. Oh, you're gonna cringe. Okay, here we go.
Not
So,
at all.
last year
Hmm.
there was a paid promotion for this new Amazon show. Like, God, what's it called? Good and Evil, or something along those lines. But
Hmm.
anyway, it was me and Jericho. We did like real life chess
Hmm.
together at South by Southwest, and we were both being we were both being basically helped by the boys at chess.com.
Hmm.
So on my side, I think it was, oh God, I want to make sure I don't butcher his name, but he's the owner of chess.com. And
Hmm.
he was on my side versus Jericho, and we each won a game. It was pretty fair. It was pretty fun. And my only training before then was using the Chess Kids app for maybe
Hmm.
like 2 hours,
Hmm.
but that was a year ago. I haven't played since,
Hmm.
and yesterday I played trading a little bit on stream, and eventually I pulled some viewers on, and I basically just asked them questions as they played,
Hmm.
and so at this point I've got a good sense of what what pieces can go where and how, and that's where I am.
Well,
So
I think you sold yourself short. That's not bad at all. And so I think we'll take sort of a multi-pronged approach. I think we can start with sort of an overview of some basic strategies.
right,
And I could, my first set, I'll put you straight into the pool and start watching you play. But that's like you're learning how to fly a plane, and I'm like, how about you fly a 787 and I just watch you, and then I'll critique you if you land. So
sounds good.
we'll start with sort of the instructional component, and then when you end up playing, we might do like a slow game. Oh, thank you, Jespera. Thank you, Eric, for the raid of the party of 602. Amazing. So basically, we'll start with that instructional component. Then when you play, it'll be a slow game, and essentially, as you're making your moves, we'll talk the moves through together.
Right.
And chess.com, I think, will then refund the points to those poor souls whom you beat up on. I mean, I know you don't even need me to beat up on those souls, but I'll just be there kind of in the background watching.
Cool. Sounds good.
So this is the starting position. Let's say that you're playing white. There are two
Right.
things, exactly two things that you need to master in order to become a grandmaster. Master
Right.
these two things, and there's nothing else that you need to know. The first is how not to blunder pieces or how not to hang pieces. And the second is how to put your pieces in good positions. That's literally all that chess is really about. So it sounds pretty easy.
Sounds straightforward. I'm sure there's a bazillion levels beyond that, but I'm ready. That sounds like an easy start. I'm in.
Everything kind of branches out from those two. Now, when you look at the starting position, the bottom line strategy in the opening,
Right.
and it's referred to as the opening for obvious reasons. It's the first, 10, 15 moves of a chess game.
Right.
Is to do the second thing that I told you. So basically to take your pieces and place them on squares where they are accomplishing a very specific task.
Okay.
Now, what do I mean by task? What I mean by task is generally they're either contributing to an attack on your opponent's king,
right,
or they're occupying a lot of space. And in order for a piece to occupy a lot of space, it has to be, and I'm going to draw this with arrows, somewhere in this middle square. That's kind of called the center.
Got it.
And and maybe you've heard a lot of this, so feel free to stop me if I'm droning on too much about something you already know. But basically, I've drawn the center, and I've drawn the 4 center squares. They're referred to as. Are you familiar at all with chess notation?
Like D3 and 4. I mean, I know of it, but like if you told me like I'd have to like take a moment and go like F, and then move my finger up until like 5. So I know of it, but I don't I'm not instinctive about it yet.
That's totally fine. So I'll try to kind of draw it with an arrow or give you time to process it if I do name a square. So what I've drawn here is the center. If you put pieces on squares roughly around this square of the board, then by definition those pieces, and what I really mean are knights and bishops, are going to be controlling the maximum number of squares. So, and again, I know I'm giving you a lot to start with. We'll put this into practice shortly.
Right.
Now, you might be, okay, great, let me develop my freaking bishops. I can't develop them. There are these stupid pawns in the way. So that's why you start the game always with a movement of the pawn. And you start with the movement of one of the 2 center pawns. The move that most beginners play is 1e4.
Right.
So could you tell me what this move accomplishes? Which piece does it unlock?
Yes. So this one I actually learned yesterday from some very smart, good players in my own chat. So what you do over here is I don't know if there's a way for me to mark, but basically the queen and the bishop both are like free to kind of be released from the back row, right?
Exactly. I mean I could make you capable of marking and it might glitch out. So but let me try.
No worries. It's okay. I can point it out. All good. I'd rather not risk it. We're good.
Gotcha. So exactly, queen and the bishop are opened.
Right.
And generally black responds with e5. Right. This is not the only possible move in this position. In fact, as you get better, there's 20 possible moves in the starting position. The move that a lot of grandmasters play, for example, is the move c5. That's called the Sicilian defense. I have no idea why. I think because it was first played in Sicily or by an Italian chess club. A lot of these names of openings really have nothing to do with the person who first played them.
Right.
Chess is crazy, if you didn't know that already. Chess players are crazy. This is like a big mental institution.
Keeping you guessing until the very, very end. I hear you.
Exactly. So, but this move should make sense to you. Basically, the pawn controls one of the 4 key central squares.
Right.
It doesn't open up any pieces yet. It doesn't open up any bishops. But again, as you get better, there's kind of principles that you can violate and rules that you can bend. But let's assume, for the purposes of this, that black does play e5.
Right.
Now, the first kind of opening principle that you should be aware of is generally you want to develop a knight first, or the knights first and then the bishops later. Now, that can be bent a little bit, but in this specific position, it's a good idea to develop one of the knights. Now, could you tell me, when you look at this sort of intuitively, which knight do you feel like developing, and where do you feel like putting it?
G1, and I would put it on F3 so they can maybe knock out that pawn if it wanted to, or put it make it feel like it's afraid or something, or I don't know. Would that be the move?
It would absolutely be the move. It breathes immediate fear. In fact, I think most of your opponents will just give up if you make this move. They won't extend the game any further. That's like, this guy is clearly a GM. I'm done. All right. So knight F3 is the best move. Now knight C3 exists. This is called the Vienna game.
Right.
A lot of good things happened in Vienna, apparently. But like you said, it doesn't attack the pawn. So this move has its own reasons, but again, you should play knight f3. Now, black develops his knight to c6 and guards the pawn.
Right.
And this leads me to sort of the second thing that is going to be a struggle for you and that we're going to work on, which is basically identifying pieces that are hanging and identifying pieces that are defended.
Right.
So if a pawn or a piece has an equal number of attackers and defenders, then you cannot capture that pawn or a piece. Normally.
Okay.
So what I mean by this is the pawn on e5 has one attacker, that would be the knight, and one defender, that would be black's knight. But if you take, you basically forfeit one of the attackers. So now black has more defenders than white has attackers, and black can just take the knight.
Right. So I lost my knight, and they're only down a pawn.
Right. So you have an extra knight for pawn. Are you familiar with sort of relative piece values? Which pieces are stronger than other pieces?
Not super well. I understand the queen is probably the most powerful,
Yes.
and the knight is the most unique in movement, but I'd say I don't have like a clear like ranking in my mind of like which are the ones that have the greatest value, or like if you ask me between like the bishop and well, but between the bishop and rook, I would say the bishop. I'm not 100% sure.
Unacceptable. Get out of the call. Just kidding. So basically, you're absolutely right. Well, the king is, just like those old Visa commercials. The penny is worth, pen is worth $5. The king is priceless. That belongs in its own category.
Right.
Because if the king is, it's kind of the lamest piece, but if the king is checkmated, the game is over. So it also is the most important piece. Now, the queen is the most powerful piece, and there is a system of point values that are assigned that helps beginners kind of understand relative power. I don't put a lot of stock in it, but I'll share it with you. I think the queen is normally assigned a value of 8 or 9 points, depending on the rank on the system. Somewhere in that neighborhood. The rook is actually the second most powerful piece.
Oh, interesting.
And the rook generally is assigned a value of 5 points. Again, don't take this to, think about this for the rest of the rook is worth 5 points. This is just for context.
Right.
And the reason why is this can be kind of reflected mathematically. The rooks just have a higher range of motion than the bishops. The rooks don't move diagonally, but they can achieve more in less amount of time than the bishops. The bishops only move diagonally.
Okay, I get it. So the bishops will always be restricted to like a single color when they're moving around, whereas the rook could theoretically if not opposed, could hit any single space in the board.
Fantastic observation. Yeah, the light squared bishop can never migrate to the dark square. So it's like completely blind and deaf as to all the action going on in the dark squares. So that's a problem. You have 2 bishops to begin with, but if one of them are traded, and this already gets very advanced, but because you pointed this out, if one of the bishops gets traded, then you might have a problem going on in the dark squares. Like if the dark squared bishop gets traded, because you don't have anything to occupy those dark squares with.
Right.
And the queen, the way you need to realize to understand the queen is that the queen is it's the war general. It's not the minion. It's not the foot soldier. It's the war general in the background directing the action. And it's only going to leap into the war if, the battering rams have basically cleared the gates and made a ruin out of your opponent's position.
Right.
And
okay, I get that.
I don't know if you've seen the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer. Amazing chess movie. Highly recommend it.
Got it.
But in this movie, it's about this boy who learns a real story based on a true story. His boy's Josh Waitzkin, and he's learning chess. And a lot of kids in general, they really want to develop their frickin' queen when they start. They feel really empowered when they put their queen right in their opponent's grill.
Right.
But the problem with that is that when this queen gets attacked, you cannot afford to lose your queen because, again, it's the most powerful piece. So putting it out at the start of the game makes the queen a huge liability, and you do not want that.
Right.
And again, I'm sorry to drone on so much. I mean,
No,
I know I'm laying out a lot of things.
I would definitely let you know that I just need a moment to absorb it. So far, I'm good. That makes total sense. And I'm weirdly I'm caught up. So this is I'm good.
Perfect. I appreciate that. So basically, going back to our key position here, knights and bishops are approximately equivalent at 3 points.
Right.
That is because, as you pointed out, the knights have a truly unique movement. They can jump over other pieces. Now, the bishop's movement is shared by the movement of the queen, but the bishop is considered a very long-range piece. It can jump from one side of the board to the other in one fell swoop. The knights are they have short legs. Right. They're not good at, if you assign the knight a task of being involved on the other side of the board, it's going to take the knight 3 or 4 moves to get there. And that's a lot of time when you think in the context of a chess game.
Sure.
But it's compensated by the unique movement. So 3 points each, bishops and knights, and the pawns, intuitively enough, are worth 1 point each. So they're the least, quote-unquote, powerful piece. Pawns are also pieces. They are a legitimate piece, but pawns are in their own category because, and I assume you're familiar entirely with the movement of the pawn. You can start by going 2 squares forward at the initial square. After that, you can only move 1 square at a time, and it captures diagonally. There's also a rule called en passant, which even some pretty advanced players are not aware of, but we'll get to that eventually. It's not important right now.
Got it.
So to recap, queen is worth 8 or 9, rooks are worth 5, knights and bishops are worth 3, and pawns are worth 1. Thank you, Grandpa, for the sub. See, someone named Grandpa found that so instructive. He subscribed. So
That's awesome. Hey, thanks for subbing, dude.
So to go back to this position, what comes to mind as a sensible developing move here for white?
For white right now, I feel like this is. Let me see. So if the knight's over there, I mean, I guess what I've seen others do, and just to kind of have like more. If I was trying to like control more of the board, I guess the first thing I would do is I would take the bishop from f1 and move it to e2. Just kind of like have it like so we can kind of like get at least that diagonal over there. If anyone tries to kind of get in my firing range, I can go in there and show some threat. Would that be...
So you're talking sort of about this diagonal kind of.
Or I was talking, I get more towards a6.
The f1 a6 diagonal.
Yes, right. Yeah. So what's the right answer there?
So bishop e2 is not a bad move. I'd give this move sort of a B. You know, it's decent. It does the job of developing the bishop. But if you notice the bishop here,
right,
when it sits on its initial square, it already controls this diagonal.
Oh yeah, you're right. There's no real value in kind of like it's not being blocked anymore, and it's not really there's no. I'm not really. If anything, I'm just blocking the queen at that point.
Good point. And so what you need to do with this bishop is, since it's already controlling this diagonal, you need to take it and put it on a square where it's controlling maybe another diagonal, or it's pressuring a certain square next to black's king. And there is actually one square that achieves that.
Oh, would that be, let me see, would that be c4?
That would be c4. This is called the Italian game, so whatever the Italians do must be good. Food, chess openings, Sicilian, Italian, I mean, really, they've made a big mark on the chess world.
Oh, yeah.
But in all seriousness, the bishop, in addition to controlling our initial diagonal, is putting pressure on the pawn on f7. This pawn on f7 is considered the weakest square on the entire chessboard, thanks, Chicken Commander. So why is that? Because it's only guarded by the king. And so it's an access point to black's king. Now, could you tell me this? Is white actually threatening to capture this pawn with his bishop? Is that something he's going to do on the next move?
No, it'd be dumb, right? Because they would just throw away their bishop, and the king would just be up by like one spot. I mean, I guess they'd forfeit their castling or whatever, but it doesn't seem like that would be the play, right?
Exactly.
So right.
And you're already grasping a lot of things in that same. So you understand already the concept of a sacrifice. I'm sure you've heard that word before in a chess context. What does that sacrifice mean? Sacrifice means giving up a piece, or giving up a piece of greater value for a piece of lesser value in order to achieve another aim. For example, in order to weaken the king, in order to gain a very important square for one of your other pieces. That's what makes chess, in my opinion, such a beautiful game. And aggressive players who have what's called an attacking style, are players who really like to sacrifice their pieces. Now, sometimes sacrifices can be unsound. You can decide to sacrifice, let's say, a queen for a knight, and you say, oh, I'm getting his king out into the middle of the board. I'm going to rip that king to shreds. But it turns out that you've miscalculated something, and the king escapes, and you end up down a queen, which is a huge disadvantage.
Right.
So not all sacrifices are clear-cut, and that's what introduces the concept of risk into the chess. And the funny thing is, people in my chat, recently in the chess world, there has been this kind of meme about something called the Jerome Gambit. And a gambit, just like in real life, refers to an opening where you actually sacrifice something.
Right.
This move exists, and it has a name. It's called the Jerome Gambit. Named after an American chess player with the last name Jerome.
Right.
Was Jerome a very, very good player? And they're going to come after me for saying this. Not really.
Oh, boy.
he was a coffee house player. He was a cigar smoking, I'm going to just mess them up, So he liked sacrifice. He didn't play seriously. And so he liked making this move.
So he would go in there.
And now the Jerome Gambit continues. Knight takes c5. Why does this move look bad? Just as some practice.
I mean, why does it look bad? Like if we were to make that move?
Yes. So is knight takes c5 an advice? Does this just win a pawn, or can black do something here?
You are in striking range of taking their king, right? Like just one move away.
It's check, exactly. So you are attacking the king, and the only way to deal with the check there are three. Right. One is to block the check, which you cannot do with a knight, because there is no piece that blocks the knight. That's, as you mentioned, why the knight is such a strong piece.
Right.
The second method of dealing with a check, intuitively enough, is to move the king away, for example, here. And the third way is to capture the piece that is delivering the check.
Right.
Is that third method possible here?
Absolutely, right. You have the opposing knight on c6 that could just take it next turn if they wanted to, just to recapture there. Right.
Exactly, and that's what you would do. And black is up not one but two pieces now. Now there is an idea. We won't go further here because we're a little bit way late. But white does have a way of recapturing one of these two pieces, which makes the Jerome Gambit playable. It's still not a great opening though. But just to introduce you to the concept of sacrifices, that's a legitimate thing.
Got it.
So, to continue, we've developed a knight, we've developed a bishop. Are you familiar with the concept of castling?
Yes, but I'd love to hear more. I understand. It's basically the kind of like the rook is like the bodyguard, comes in, pushes the king to the side, and like, I'll take this bullet for you, and you kind of like, as long as there's no one in the way. So right now, the rook at h1 could hop into, I believe, e1, and then the king would go to, maybe
F1. Yeah.
F1, and the king would be g1. Okay,
yes.
Got it. Okay, yes, there we go.
That's exactly right. I don't know what the origins of castling are. I don't think castling existed in the earliest versions of chess, but whoever invented this is a genius because it kind of changes the game entirely.
Oh.
And you're exactly right in describing what castling does. It really does two things. First of all, the rook acts as the bodyguard, and also the king is now behind this defensive cocoon of these three pawns.
Right.
And so you might say, well, isn't it the same thing when the king is in the center? Not really, because you've already pushed one of the pawns in front of the king forward, by definition, weakening the king.
Right.
And the third thing to notice about castling, notice this pawn on f7 and this equivalently weak pawn on f2.
Right.
As you pointed out, when you castle, now this is defended by the rook. So it's not as weak of a point as it is when the king is in the center.
Right.
And finally, what you can do when you've already castled and tucked your king away is you can work on opening up the center. And you don't have to worry one bit about your king suffering the consequences of ripping open the center.
Right. He won't be in the line of fire anymore because he's all castled up in the corner there.
Exactly. Now, is the king safe forever? Absolutely not. Many chess games have been won by an attack against the castled king, and hopefully we'll get to that at some point. So castling here is a good move. Could you give me a solid alternative here in terms of developing more of your undeveloped pieces?
Wouldn't you just, could I move, let's say, 2D up one space so that, like, I've seen a lot of players kind of do this, like, this almost like pyramid of, pawns where it's like, one is top, like, one is one space ahead in the middle, and it's kind of flanked by two behind them in the, like, adjacent rows. Would that be a move?
It would, and actually that's the move I was looking for, because it opens up the other bishop.
Ah, there we go. Right.
I think I'm going to give you the honorary Grandmaster title for that. You'll be teaching me. And yeah, so this is called a pawn chain for relatively obvious reason. One pawn defends the next.
Right.
So, they're like a conga line, and that's pretty good because each pawn is now protected, and that's kind of something you want to aim for. That's a little bit advanced, but, it doesn't hurt to keep that in the back of your mind.
Sure.
So black usually develops his own knight. And here again, you have a pretty wide choice of developing a bunch of your pieces. You can develop your knight to c3.
Right.
Sensible. You could absolutely castle. But the move that I'd like you to make, there is a third option of development. And you should be able to identify the piece that hasn't been developed yet, that I haven't mentioned yet. The real question is, which square do you put this piece on?
Oh, wow. Oh, I'm actually kind of a little bit lost here. So I'm not going to touch those three pawns that are kind of defending each other there based on what we just talked about. The idea is that the king can theoretically be castled to, like, let's say the right corner, so also on the left side is where we may want to develop.
Perfectly good move. Yeah.
Right. So I don't know, maybe we'd move. Oh God.
Which pieces are still in their initial square? Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, I was gonna guess A2, the pawn over there, to kind of like try and it might be time to just release the rook on the right, and H1 is gonna be dedicated to kind of like castling, at least initially. I forget the other rook, which you said was a very powerful piece. That's one we want to get into action eventually. So I guess would it be moving to 2A to 2? That's what I was gonna
like this
2-3 or 2-4. Yeah, something like that. Yes.
Or like this to open up the rook. So I actually like your thinking here, and this demonstrates a certain depth already. The fact that you pay attention to the rook is good. Now, however, Just like the queen is sort of the war general that comes in at the end.
Right.
The rook it's an incredibly powerful piece in the open board because it moves side to side and up and down, but it's very clunky. It's almost like the road conditions are not. I was going to compare the rook to a tank, but that would be a terrible comparison. That would be the opposite of what I'm trying to say. The rook is like, a Rolls Royce down, a Bosnian road right now.
Right.
Like there's a lot of potholes in this road. I don't know why I said Bosnian road. I have no idea. Of all the wars that I can compare it to, I choose some random one.
I totally get that one. Yeah.
Sorry, I was a history major, so I'm intolerable with my analogies. But can you see that? Let's say I even let you bring the rook out.
Right.
The white pawn is blocking the rook from accessing the other side of the board. This pawn needs to be pushed further. And even if I let you push your pawn all the way up, and you develop your rook to a4 and you feel like a beast for exactly 1 second, I say congratulations, you've developed your rook. But where is this rook going? What is it accomplishing? Really nothing, right? It's staring at your own bishop.
Right.
Does that kind of make sense?
No, not at all. Not at all. Because all it does is it just makes it vulnerable for no reason, right?
Exactly. It would make it vulnerable to attack by black's pawns and pieces, and which is fine as long as a piece is accomplishing something, but it's really not.
Right.
So what I would say is focus on your knights and your bishops. Knight c3 being one move, but the other piece we've left out is this bishop on c1.
Right.
And where could that piece jump to?
Oh, that could theoretically, let me see here. That could go to, let me see here. So it obviously can't go to, I guess, towards 3 because, a3 because that's blocked off by the pawn. But it can go up towards there. So it would need to be, let me see here. It can't be f4 because, well, it could be f4 because it's not, would it be, yeah, it would not be vulnerable to the knight there. Oh, but it would be vulnerable to the other pawn.
Bingo. This pawn on e5 would be able to capture the bishop. So that would not be a good move.
Would it be 5G or
It
G5?
would. It would. Yeah. I like 4G myself, but select 5G in select cities. It's actually called G5. You actually say the letter first and then the number.
Got it.
And I think there's an old system of notation where you actually do say the square first, but the way that most modern notation is like bishop to G5 or knight to C3.
Gotcha.
And
got it.
Man, the conspiracy theorists have gone to town in my chat. 5G. Oh no, coronavirus. Yeah. Anyways, so bishop G5. Now, why is this move good? In addition to developing a piece sort of as far as it'll go, it creates something called a pin. And a pin is defined as a situation where one of your pieces immobilizes an opponent's piece because if that piece moves, then you will capture a piece of greater value. So what does that mean? Notice this diagonal.
Oh yeah.
This is
that's
a
right.
pin.
He moves it out of the way. It's game over.
It's game over. You've captured the queen.
Right.
Now people will do that at your level. They'll be like, "Oh, I'm going to town on this pawn," and then they'll forget about the queen. And that's what I call tunnel vision. That's something that beginners often have, which is inevitable. Where it's almost like you're like you seeing a cookie, you're reaching for that cookie, and you don't see any of the surroundings, and that's just going to happen. You're going to get attracted by a certain possibility, and you don't see the whole board. But that's okay, as long as you can kind of keep these things in mind. So this is a pin,
right?
And it has to be a piece of greater value. For example, if I moved in this situation my bishop back to e7,
right?
Could you explain why this is no longer a pin?
I mean, it's not. I mean, they could just go the other direction, couldn't they? Well, I mean, why isn't that not a pin? So, move over there.
Which part of the definition, I suppose, and I can repeat it, does this not sort of adhere to?
Oh, the piece is in the greater value.
Boom, bingo, exactly. So this bishop is of the same value, so which means black's knight can move away, and if it does, and I'm not really making good moves for black, I'm forsaking my development here.
Right.
But I'm not blundering any pieces. And it's called hanging a piece. When you put a piece on a square where it can be captured for no reason,
right,
that's called hanging a piece. And that's like the trademark of beginners.
Gotcha.
Now, do grandmasters hang pieces? Absolutely. I've hung pieces before. Because, I mean, the best chess players in the world have hung pieces before. I can show you examples. So it's a trademark of human faults, but it happens a lot more at the beginner level when you're not entirely familiar with piece movements yet.
Right.
And that's totally fine. We'll work on that. So black captures, and this is called a trade. A trade is when two pieces of approximately equal value have been exchanged and taken away from the board.
Right.
And the more pieces are exchanged, and especially if the queens are exchanged, the closer the game gets to the final stage. I'm sure you've heard of this term called endgame.
Yes.
An endgame is the phase of the game when most pieces have been taken off from the board. The definition is a loose one. There's no formal definition. The opening is basically when all of the pieces are still getting developed, and the middle game or the mid game is when all of the pieces have gotten developed and both sides have most of their pieces remaining on the board. Most games that you play are going to be decided actually either in the opening or in the middle game. So once all of the pieces have been developed, and let's make some better moves for black. Let's say black does the same thing, d6. Let's introduce the concept of preventing your opponent from doing something, which is a little bit advanced, but I think you're learning all this very, very fast. Now, if it were black's move, it's not, but if it were black to move, where would he develop this bishop that I've just highlighted in red, based upon where you developed yours?
Let me see. It would not be. Let me see here. E6, right? Because then it would just be vulnerable to the bishop at C4, right? Like, so would it go down to? Oh, maybe would it be G4?
It absolutely would. And just to point something out, it would be vulnerable to white's bishop. But what could black do if white captures?
Oh, in that case, that could be. Let me see here. If they do capture, what would be the play here? Looking around. Oh, nope. There's no pawn. Oh, yeah, the pawn could just grab it right there.
Exactly.
Yes, the pawn at F7.
Precisely. The pawn at F7. So this is a trade. This is a trade, and is this a good trade or a bad trade? We'll get to that, but nobody really benefits from this specific trade.
Right.
But because you're in sort of the training wheels phase, you want to keep most of the pieces on the board so that you could better get acquainted with how they move around and how they cooperate. So bishop G4 is perfect.
Right.
Now, let's say in your infinite grandmasterly wisdom, you were playing with the white pieces here, and you were like, I really don't want black, my opponent, to develop his bishop to the super active square.
Right.
Could you devise a way to prevent his bishop from reaching this square?
Let me see. So I can't move my pawn at H2 to H3 because it would just get. Oh, that makes no sense. Oh, I would move would I move G? No.
So you didn't want to play H3 for what reason?
Oh no, well, actually no, it wouldn't be. It would just get theoretically just get devoured by the bishop. But then the other pawn would just grab it, right? Like,
exactly. Or which other piece could take the bishop here?
Oh, not the knight. Oh, the rook, of course.
Exactly. And this is why rooks are so powerful. When the pawn disappears from the square in front of the rook, look at white's rook. It's already X-raying black's rook. And it's already on a really good square, even though it's only moved once.
Right.
So that's why I mentioned not to artificially try to develop your rook, because rooks kind of jump into the game by themselves when this pawn disappears from the board.
Right.
And one of the hardest things for you to begin will be to identify when there is a piece that can be captured by any other piece. It's easy to get freaked out. But what you want to pay attention to is what defends a particular piece. So here, once you put this pawn on H3, it is defended by the pawn on G2 and the rook on H1. Right. So it's defended twice. It's very well defended. When a pawn is defended by another pawn, that is the best form of defense, because by definition, pawns are pieces of the least value. So if a pawn that's defended by another pawn is captured, then essentially by definition your opponent's giving up a piece of greater value. That would be a blunder.
Right.
But you're absolutely right. You saw the move. So if the bishop comes out to G4, then you do what?
You just capture it with your pawn, right?
You capture with your pawn.
Yeah, right.
And you're up a piece. I mean, that would be a terrible move, but some people would insist on it.
It would be a terrible move for them to put their bishop over there, right? I mean, right.
Yeah.
Totally. Okay, got it.
Now, just to give you some context, at Grandmaster level, if I were to blunder a piece against another Grandmaster, I don't know if you're familiar with too many chess players like Magnus or Hikaru.
Yes.
So if I were to make this move against Hikaru, first of all, he would ask me what I'm smoking if I played Bishop G4. I would not do this against him. If I would to mouse slip or something, I would immediately resign the game. So being down a piece at a high level is disastrous to such an extent that I know that I'm going to lose this game and I would resign. I'd put my king down.
Oh wow, it's kind of like in StarCraft. If you know you lost, like a base or whatever, like just even if you had units, you just know like it's over. So got it.
Exactly, and I like that you make it because a lot of people come along when I say this to them, like, but why would you resign? You have so many other pieces on the board. But I'm like, but you don't understand. I mean, and just like the comparison that you made, I'm not too familiar with StarCraft, but
sure.
It's like you lost a crucial part of your army. It doesn't matter that you have a lot of other freaking soldier, whatever you have. Right. You're done. You're done.
Right. Yep.
And
makes total sense.
But at your level, and not trying to
No. Do what you need to do, man. I'm a scrub. Let's do this.
Essentially, if you blunder a piece, you're down a piece. That by no means the game is over. So
right.
The real, I would say benchmark of when you need to start worrying is like if you blunder your queen or you hang, let's say, a rook. That's pretty serious, but you can still recover from that. Right. And I think that's what makes chess at your level kind of fun is like you can make a terrible move. But you can rest assured in the confidence that your opponent's probably also at some point later in the game going to make a terrible move in return.
Right.
But let's say that you play this move h3 and
right.
black does a castle. And right. You can develop your knight. Could you remind me which square the knight is best developed to?
That would be c3, right?
It would be c3. And there's one more thing I want to talk about before we sort of rehearse this with the game. Let's say black develops his bishop to e6.
Right.
Now remember the concept of the... Well, first, let's say black plays h6. Now, without me introducing anything about this move, could you tell me what this move accomplishes and what white should do in return?
So that puts threat on my bishop on g5, right?
Exactly.
And what I should do, if I take... No, I'm not taking the... Taking the pawn makes no sense. I would just maybe like I would just back up. I would go to f4 maybe with the bishop, just kind of get out of its way.
So here,
the deal. Yes.
That would kind of be from the frying pan into the fire because I have another little MRF here.
Right, I didn't see that. Yes. So if that's the case, I mean I lose. Oh, I guess I would go down to h4, right?
Beautiful. And the benefit of this move versus let's say going back all the way down to d2 is that you maintain. What is this called again? Do you remember this term?
Oh, pinning. You're pinning the, right.
Bingo. You're pinning the knight, so you maintain the pin. Why is a pin so good? Because it just immobilizes your opponent's pieces. The knight can't move, and if the knight... And another thing is, this is a little bit advanced, but you can say, well, can I unpin myself by moving the queen? And then I can move the knight? Well, that's not a bad move, but now you can actually capture the knight with your bishop.
Right.
And what happens is that, well, there's no problem, right? Black captures with the pawn. But do you see anything about what's happened to black's, what's called pawn structure? Does anything catch your eye about black's pawns now?
For sure. Like the wall is gone and the king is just like, it's open. It's like, open for business right there. And a couple of moves could mean, well, the king's vulnerable now, right? Exactly.
You said it, and because it's called a ruined pawn structure. And this is where I like to pull out the World War II comparisons, but instead I'll say like black's pawn structure is like Roman ruins. They're good for nothing. This kind of avenue toward the king is open. Right. And there's a set of terms that refer to this. There's files. Files are, straight up and down. So this is the G file.
Right.
This is the 8th rank, so it's rank and file. And intuitively there's diagonals, and these are, of course, diagonals. Right. And in this situation, again, we're extending this a little bit far, but I think, you're grasping things fast enough to kind of understand this. You might ask, well, great, black's pawns are like Roman ruins, but how do we actually access black's king? And this is where we would initiate what's called an attack. And an attack is simply a concentrated assault against your opponent's king with the aim of, in the end, delivering checkmate.
Right.
But you can't attack without any pieces. And queens in particular are very, very strong attackers for the obvious reason that the queen's the most powerful piece. Notice what I said about the queens earlier. It's only really good when the air has been cleared and the gates have been crashed into. And the gates have definitely been crashed here.
Sure. So you could essentially send the queen up the right side, the G rank, and it'd be very tough to oppose her, right?
Exactly. Or let's say this square. Now there's a problem with doing that, right? Because the queen cannot jump over the knight.
Right.
So could you devise a scheme where you nonetheless are able to send the queen over to the right side? And the right side is also called the king's flank or the king's side because the king is on e1 initially. This encompasses the king's side and this encompasses the queen's side. So could you send the king, or the queen, you don't send the king anywhere here, the queen to the king's side. How would you do that?
Let me see. Would the knight just go to d2?
That would be a very good move, paving the path for the queen. But let's say I wanted to kill two birds with one stone.
Right.
And in addition to activating the queen, I also wanted this knight to participate in the attack.
Oh, I see. So in that case, you would just maybe send them over to h4.
That's a grandmaster level move. That's what I would play. Knight h4.
Oh, wow.
So the point I want to make is, even though you might consider yourself a beginner, the beautiful thing about chess is you can appreciate really good moves without knowing too much about the game, because everything can be explained by logic. That's at least my sort of theory.
No, and I totally get that. Yeah, absolutely. That's a. Yeah, the analogies. I mean, I've been great so far. I get, like, I can see this as like a real battle.
Yeah, and it's white's in great shape. Now, notice you haven't castled yet. And that's where in chess, you have to understand that sometimes the rules are violated. Like, you don't always have to castle blindly. Right. Sometimes black has done something so wrong that you can actually focus on punishing him rather than doing things like castling. And here, actually, not castling is good because white's king is safe in the center. Right. Let's say black does... Yeah.
Oh, so I'm like, one of my questions I was gonna plan on asking today is like what's my signal, my red flag that bring the king down into the bunker? Like, how, like what is it called there? So I guess is it when the, like, if I'm not controlling the center, if the other player is controlling the center, is that when it's like, all right, like bring him in, let's castle up the king?
Yeah, I mean, normally yeah, sorry, continue.
Oh, you're good. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, normally, you castle in most situations. It really, I would point it out as, you only don't castle if, let's say, your opponent has made a very bad move in the opening. Let's say he's given his queen up. Then he has nothing to attack you with, so you might keep your king in the center of the board. Or a situation like this, where your opponent, for example, has allowed his pawns in front of his king to be... He's castled, and he's allowed his pawn structure to be ruined, and you want to focus on attacking rather than wasting time castling.
Right.
So you're going to castle in like 95% of the games. And when we play, you're gonna see that I will advise you to castle most of the time.
Gotcha.
Okay. But last question here before we kind of jump in. Let's say black develops his own bishop, let's say to d7. Where could you... And the key for you to understand is, before you locate a square, try to look at the whole board and see if that square is defended by any of your opponent's pieces.
Oh, sure. Right.
So where would you put this queen? How would you activate it?
Let's see. I believe the move would be... I think it would just be h5. I mean, I don't see any immediate threats around there.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Are you attacking any of your opponent's pieces here? So let's say he makes an empty move.
Right. In this case, would I just grab the pawn in front of me? I mean, I don't see any reason why not. So you would just kind of push up, and now they're in trouble, right? Like,
they're in huge trouble.
Yeah.
And that would be right. Now, just as a last thing to kind of introduce you to kind of GM level chess.
Right.
In this position, I can visualize checkmate in 5 moves.
Oh.
So white starts and delivers checkmate in 5 moves. That's a lot less impressive than it sounds. And the way that white delivers his checkmate, just to kind of inspire you a little bit, and this is where chess beauty, I'll introduce you to kind of real chess beauty. You can do stuff that looks impossible, but really is possible because of the properties of the position. That's called tactics.
Oh.
And in this position, taking the pawn is, again, like a B+ kind of move. It's a great move. Black's in huge trouble. But you can actually do something really, really cunning. You can give a check on G6.
Right.
And this looks terrible. You might be like, what is this guy saying? Why?
Right. I am confused by that one, because then the pawn would just take it, and then he's got his front line again.
And not only that, you've given up your queen.
Oh, absolutely, yes. Yeah, that would suck too.
Exactly. So, but if I try to execute this move, it won't let me for some reason. Is this a glitch on the site, or is there a reason it won't let me take the queen? If you look at the whole board.
Why won't it let you... What would be preventing this from happening? I do not see it.
Okay, so, and this is common because in your mind, you're paying attention to the king side and this side of the board.
Right.
And this is kind of an example of tunnel vision. But take a look at this bishop that I just highlighted on c4.
Right.
And take a look at the diagonal that it's controlling. Does anything jump out at you?
Dude, you're right. Shit, yeah. So if the pawn did take the queen, then the bishop just wins. That's it.
Exactly. So in the rules of chess, it's illegal to take the queen. Notice what is this an application of? Which concept that I've introduced to you?
Pinning, right?
Exactly. The pawn is pinned, and this is the ultimate pin. When not only can the piece, not only is it inadvisable for a piece to move, it is literally illegal for the pawn to move.
Wow.
So this queen is immune.
Wow, that's amazing.
And so black has to move his king one square to the right.
Right.
And now when you capture the pawn, what additional benefit have you derived from giving that check preliminarily and then capturing the pawn?
You have basically opened the... Have you just like opened the line, open the rank, like by doing that, or what else am I missing here? Let me see.
Maybe simpler than you, because like if you compare this position and this position, it's like where's wall? It's like what is the only difference here? There's only one difference.
What is the difference there?
This position or this position?
I feel like I'm missing something simple here. Where's the... Not sure. Sorry, I don't know.
No problem. And really, I think you've seen this. It's just like you're thinking of something more complicated. It's the position of the black king that's different.
Right.
So look at, and I'm sure you know, this position the king is here.
Right.
And this position the king is here. And you might be a big freaking deal. Like, what are you saying? Well, what I'm saying is that this king is actually in check right now. So this king in this situation is being attacked.
Yes, right.
And so the king has to move one square to the left.
Right.
But now if you compare the two positions, in this situation it is black's turn. And in this situation it is white's turn.
Right.
And so by initiating that whole sequence of the check, white has gained what's called a tempo, which really just means gained an extra move.
Right.
Is that kind of making sense? So here it's black's turn, and black can involve defensive pieces to kind of throw water onto the fire.
Right.
Versus here, white can deliver the deadly blow because it's his move again.
Right. Yeah.
And this deadly blow comes in the form of another move that exploits this pin, which is the move knight to g6.
Oh. And so if it tries to move back, it's gone.
Yes. And, well, the pawn cannot take the knight because, again, of this pin. And white is posing a threat now that black cannot defend against. So checkmate is imminent.
Right.
So maybe you can tell me what... And this will be your first mate-in-one puzzle where you basically look at a position and identify where the checkmate is. Let's say black makes a random move.
Right.
Can you identify the checkmate in this position?
It is... Let me see here. It's not the bishop. If the bishop were to go in, no.
Right, that pawn is defended, exactly.
Yeah, right, that's that. The knight's only positioning to move forward would be h8, but that's not going to really do anything. It'll lock it into... It'll have to force it down. And the queen can zip up to h8, or more likely would it... Let's see, would it be h8 or would it be g7?
You're almost there. So one of these two squares, I'll give you a hint, is correct. Is the checkmating square.
Oh no, of course it's h7, of course, right? Because then you could just hit either one, no matter what.
So this square?
Yes, is that it? No?
Almost, but then I can capture it with my king.
Oh yeah, that's an idiot move. Yes, you're right.
And the knight is not the knight is not yet.
Position.
But you're
Got
almost there. You have to put it in a square where it's guarded by the knight, and that's one of the hardest things to visualize.
Oh.
Knight defenses because of the unusual movement of the knight.
Yeah. Okay, so then in this case, based on what you said, it would be h8, right? So
Yep.
if the king tried to take the queen, knight gets it. If it tried to move away, queen gets it. So there's no escape, no matter
Precisely. The queen is guarding g7, h7. The king cannot move onto a pawn. So f7, because of the presence of this pawn, the king cannot go anywhere. So it's basically entombed by a combination of its own pieces and the knight and the queen.
Right.
And in chess, the knight and the queen actually constitute one of the greatest attacking pairs on the board. The knight and the queen have incredible synergy, and you can kind of see why here. It's
I definitely
almost
see in this scenario, yeah.
It's like a yo-yo. You know, the knight is like the string that is able to extend its influence and defend critical squares where the queen then jumps onto.
Right.
And now a lot of people here would look at this position and say, "Oh snap! I can take the rook. Why can take the rook with this knight? Is this a good, based on what we talked about in the piece value system? Is this a desirable trade?" It's not really a trade, as we'll talk about, but is it a desirable thing to do for white? Let's ignore for a second the checkmate exists. Just if you consider this in a vacuum, is this something you'd want to do?
No, you said the rook is way more valuable than the knight, right?
Okay, so would you give up? I mean, from white's perspective, would you want to give away a knight for a rook?
Knight for a rook. Oh, yes. So
Yeah.
in a general sense, yes, that would make sense. Correct. Right.
Yeah, not a trick question. Exactly. You'd want to give the knight for the rook. That would be, there's a name for that. You have an extra exchange. A knight for a rook or a bishop for a rook is called an exchange. Not too important, but just for your knowledge.
Right.
And white is, how winning is this? White's much, much better. That's a very serious, that's like 5 points for 3. Pretty serious advantage. That's being like 2 pawns up.
Right.
And so your goal then, to summarize in the opening, is to bring your pieces out. Thank you, Chicabuga. Is to bring your pieces out onto squares where they are doing something, and doing something in your terms really normally means either pinning an opponent's piece, or aiming at your opponent's king, or in some way in the general vicinity of the center of the board, because then they are able to control and contest the most number of squares.
Right.
That's true even mathematically. If the knight is on the rim, and there's a kind of a saying, knights on the rim are grim, it is controlling 1, 2, 3, 4 squares, right?
Right.
Controlling just means it can literally land on 4 squares.
Right.
And if you compare that to the knight in the center, it's controlling, let's count 1. Whoop, that is not how the knight moves. Oh, that is neat. Jeez, I am the worst arrow drawer ever. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now you might look, is it really controlling the square it came from? Technically, yes. So it's controlling 8 squares.
Right.
And that is a huge, 8, 4, who cares? That is a huge difference in chess. Because the more squares a piece is controlling, the better it is for the piece. Are there exceptions to that rule? Do you ever develop the knight to the corner? Absolutely. There are hundreds and thousands of games where this has been done successfully. Not in this position, but there are situations when you are, let's say, leading the knight to this square specifically. That's called a maneuver. When you take a piece from one square and through one move or more, aim to place it on a different square. Sometimes you need to, pass a war zone, or you need to pass an awkward square to reach a good square, and so therefore there are exceptions to that rule.
Right.
And so that's why you want to develop your pieces toward the center of the board. You usually want to tuck your king away, and then, again, this is not what you always do in chess, but for purposes of starting things out, you want to find a way to direct your pieces toward the side of the board on which your opponent's king resides, whether that is the middle, or normally it's going to be the king side, because normally your opponents are also going to castle.
Right.
And through the lens of their first couple of games, which I'm warning you, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to wrap your head around everything. Your clock's going to be ticking.
Sure.
But we're going to discuss ways that you can do that in addition to what we talked about just now, which is ruining your opponent's pawn structure.
Right. Turn it into ruins. Got it.
Yeah, which is basically what you're going to do on my guidance. So